Drug developers, investors, researchers, and corporate executives wrestle weekly to understand what is happening in commercial development of NASH medications. Join hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Stephen Harrison, C-suite veteran Peter Traber, and forecasting and pricing guru Roger Green as they discuss the issues affecting the evolving NASH market from their own unique perspectives on this week's edition of Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
For everyone with an interest in NASH, or more broadly, fatty liver disease, surf's up, because episode 27 of Surfing the NASH Tsunami starts now. I'm coming to you this week from Corpus Christi, Texas, where Tropical Storm Beta threatened to dump 10 to 12 inches of rain and knock out power before heading on a more northerly course over the weekend. I had this fantasy where I was going to have to call Louise and Donna first thing this morning and ask which one of them wanted to MC because I was powerless, but happily that didn't turn out. For those who haven't been here, the coastal bend area of Texas has great beaches and laid-back people, and the Texas State Aquarium, which is the perfect place to take your grandchild, complete with a splash park, which we use for shooting low-pressure water cannons at one another for 5 or 10 minutes. As I mentioned last week, this is our first episode of autumn. Today we're going to do something we did in June, and we're going to continue going forward. First episode of every season will be a crystal ball look 3 months ahead. Unfortunately, the summer episode was eclipsed when the FDA announced their complete response letter for Intercept 2 days after we dropped an episode saying that Intercept's launch would be the big event of summer. This time, let's hope for no surprises. Here's today's big news. Stephen is missing in action on a scheduled episode for the first time since we launched the podcast. For extra credit, to any of you who remember the other one he missed and the reason why? Luckily for us, our good friend Naim Alkhouri is available to join Donna, Louise, and me. So this should provide plenty of time to explore our 4 predictions. I want to thank you. Last week's episode had the biggest first day uptake of any episode except the ILC episodes and the Intercept CRL letter we just talked about. Thanks for your continued enthusiasm. Now I just want to figure out how we can get you guys to actually talk to us on the bulletin board and the discussion groups. We keep posting questions, nobody answers. It would really be great for someone to come in this week because we're going to start making decisions on our AASLD coverage next week, and that's the discussion group question we have up right now. Please ask questions. If you do, I'll set up a personal phone call for us to discuss anything else you wish. If you don't want to talk with me, I'll see if anybody else is available. Finally, in terms of music, Naim and I haven't discussed this, but I'm hoping to use another selection from the music that he sent us back a couple of months ago to escort us out of this week's episode. People really praised it at the time. I don't see why not now. So with that, let's go on to the podcast, starting with our icebreaker, which this week will be professional highlight.
First of all, your podcast would never be the same if you turned it over to a patient and a nurse together when you got it back. And I think that's a good thing. But, you know, maybe we'll see that in the future as you continue your travels during a pandemic and a global climate change transformation. Professionally, for the Global Liver Institute, we have had continuing success with our relationship with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention across the various divisions and their inclusion of specific language for NAFLD and NASH, starting first with a change in the diabetes education. So I'm very excited to what is gearing up towards a 4 CDC division panel that we'll be able to do on liver health that we've never been able to do before. So I'm really excited about that.
I'll go. We were doing some trial scanning last week, and it was just great to have people out and about, being safe and trying to get access to diagnostics, which was a really nice thing to see. And each of the days we did was a really nice experience.
Naim?
I'm happy that we recently published a paper in Hepatology about how to maintain the integrity of NASH clinical trials during the COVID epidemic with my co-authors, Drs. Anita Kohli, Rohit Lumba, and Stephen Harrison. I hope this will serve as a guide to, optimize the conduct of these trials during COVID. And then I've been working on my Twitter presence also, and I'm happy to report that I doubled the number of followers I have over the past 2 weeks. So if anyone is there and listening, follow me at Alkhouri Naim on Twitter. I regularly post about liver-related topics on my Twitter account.
That's fantastic, Naim. And in some ways, not so different from what I was going to say, which is that we've had a tremendous upswing in the number of Hep Dynamics followers and Surfing NASH subscribers. In the last month, I think we've probably increased that number by better than 50% from what it was. We're getting close to 300 now. And I'm going to start a program of reaching out once a week or twice a week to people, 15 minutes to half an hour, just to call and talk about what you do within the NASH community and your interest in the podcast and what we can do to serve you better. I'm hoping I'm in the middle of proving that I can go anywhere on the road I need to and do a podcast. So if this one goes well in terms of sound quality and all that, then all good. So today is going to be a simple format. Each of us prepared in advance to talk a little bit about one specific item of interest that will be happening during the third quarter. What we're going to do is one surfer is going to discuss the topic, and then the rest of us will ask questions. And then we'll go on to the second surfer and repeat the process, and then the third, and then the fourth. And if we have any time left, we'll try to tie it together with a bow. And if not, someone will make an amazingly profound and pithy closing statement, Louise and Donna both being famous for that. And then we will go on from there to wrap up. So, Naim, why don't you get us started, please?
So although 2020 has been a difficult year for all of us, we actually had a few positive developments in the NASH drug development space. So I think over the next few months, especially at the ASLD, we will have several presentations with new therapeutic agents. So I just wanted to summarize some of the promising results that we learned about recently. First, I want to start with the Akero program. They have an FGF21 agonist called efruxifermin. It used to be called Akero 001, and they had a press release showing very promising results. So initially, they randomized patients to placebo or 3 doses of GF21 agonist, and they showed that, according to MRI PDFF, there was significant reduction in liver fat fraction. And then in patients that met that threshold of 30% relative fat fraction reduction from baseline on MRI, they actually did a liver biopsy, and they showed significant improvement in liver fibrosis. So 48% had improvement by 1 stage, 28% had improvement by 2 stages, and this is a very short period of time, only 16 weeks. And there was also NASH resolution, weight loss with the higher doses, and improvement in lipid profile. So I do believe that this is a promising program, and I look forward to learning more about it at the upcoming liver meeting. The other exciting program we have in NASH is with Inventiva and their drug lanifibranor. This is a PAM-PPAR agonist, so PPAR alpha, delta, and gamma. This was a longer trial, so it was 24 weeks. They had lower dose 800 milligrams daily, higher dose 1200 milligrams versus placebo. And the results based on biopsy were very impressive because they met both primary endpoints that constitute the FDA regulatory pathway for drug approval. So they met NASH resolution with no worsening in fibrosis, and also improvement in fibrosis by 1 stage with no worsening in NASH. So this is very impressive. I think the drug has a positive effect on metabolic syndrome components, except for weight gain, and there was significant weight gain with the lanifibranor doses. But this is another promising program with good efficacy. Novo Nordisk with semaglutide also had an impressive press release. This was a longer study, 72 weeks, and they assessed histologic response to 3 doses of semaglutide, and they showed actually resolution of NASH in 59%. So this is one of the highest rates we've seen when you use the high-dose semaglutide. Of course, semaglutide is on the market as a diabetes medication. It has proven efficacy in reducing A1C levels, a positive effect on lipid profile, but most importantly, it has proven cardiovascular outcomes. And we know that patients with NASH die from cardiovascular disease more than even liver disease. So this is very important. This is, a promising drug that will also target metabolic syndrome. And then finally, I wanted to mention also the Gilead program that they did a trial looking at their compounds with firsocostat and cilofexor, in addition to the novel compound semaglutide. So, given the biological complexity of NASH and multiple pathways involved in disease progression, it makes sense to look at combination therapy. And this is going to be 3 drugs looked at in one pilot, but I look forward to looking at the results at the ASLD meeting. So several, promising programs. I think the future is going to be bright for us, and we'll have FDA-approved medications hopefully next year or 2.
Thanks, Naim. Great way to get us started on this.
I just had a question. All of those sounded excellent and great responses. What happens when the person comes off the clinical study and therefore stops the medication. Do you know what the outcome is? Is there a follow-up study for discontinuation of the medication? And if so, do you see a recurrence of the disease?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, we've seen in older trials, when we used pioglitazone, vitamin E, that when you stop the medications, the liver enzymes go up, indicating that maybe the disease is coming back. Some of these programs, they did very short-term studies, as I mentioned, 16 weeks, 24 weeks. We have some potent drugs, so we will see how the future shapes up. But it might be that we use very potent drugs for a period of time, get them to a better place, induce some fibrosis regression, and then you have to keep these patients on a maintenance drug that could be easier to take with less side effects. But there is the possibility that many patients with advanced fatty liver disease will require lifelong therapy. Very important topic.
Naim, one of the presentations I talked about out of the digital ILC meeting was from Hanmi in Pharmaceuticals in Korea, their compound, I think it's 15211 if I remember correctly, which is a combination GLP-1 GIP glucagon triple agonist. And they showed some remarkable early stage results accompanied by a safety profile that didn't appear to have any obvious major flaws in it. Do you believe that at the end of the day, those compounds will supersede the roles that the single entity GLPs play, or do you believe that each will have a place if you saw it as you see it going forward?
You're absolutely right. And there are other compounds with AstraZeneca. They have, the GLP-1, glucagon. Other companies have similar compounds. Lilly have a very potent GLP-1, GIP. I think it's to be determined. Just because you have more mechanisms of actions, it's not going to always translate into more weight loss and efficacy in terms of NASH. So I don't think we have a clear answer yet. A similar story also with PPARs, as PPAR gamma alone versus PAM-PPAR versus PPAR alpha gamma. I think I like to see the data before we just decide based on mechanism of action.
I'd be remiss not to mention that I think Altimmune also has a glucagon GLP-1 GIP triple in pipeline. Donna, do you have a question?
That's fascinating, and I'll leave the science to the scientist. I think that one of the strengths that I hear reinforced in that is the diversity of mechanisms across the research landscape. And certainly, I see my role as reinforcing and supporting that diversity rather than have it foreclosed too soon.
Amen. I've got one more question. Naim, a couple of episodes ago, I want to say it was 25, but it might have been 24. Stephen was virtually pounding the table. Anytime Stephen starts with, I want to make a controversial statement, my ears pick up. He did that here. His controversial statement was that if we really want to expedite drug development in the field, we will take the very best agents that we've got and put them together in combinations instead of running them out as monotherapy and reserving combinations for the things that have not performed as well as monotherapy. A, I'd love for you to comment on that in general. And B, if you can think of any specific combination therapies of agents that appear to be robust, for example, what would you put on top of the Akero molecule as a combination therapy, or what would you want to take out with lanifibranor, just to use the two of the ones that you talked about?
Yeah, you can think about combination two ways. Number one is to increase efficacy, but number two is to mitigate some of the potential side effects. So, for example, semaglutide looks great. You lose weight, you improve A1C, lipid panel, and you have NASH resolution, but they didn't show fibrosis improvement. So I would like to combine it with, a drug that has proven anti-fibrotic effect. And the largest data set we have is with obeticholic acid, for example. And maybe by using semaglutide, you can mitigate the negative effects on the lipid profile using OCA. So I think, this is how I think about it. I think lanifibranor, in terms of efficacy, it showed great efficacy, but also the weight gain is not something to neglect. So maybe if you combine it with the GLP-1 that induces some weight loss, that could be one way to mitigate that. And maybe maybe enhance the NASH resolution aspect. I think, the future is full of possible combinations. We'll see how the field shapes up, but I think, definitely there is room for improvement in terms of mitigating side effects and increasing efficacy.
Those are great answers, Naim. Thanks a lot. Louise, you have another question, or shall we go on to Donna, who I think is next on our list?
I didn't have another question. I think it's just very exciting to have multiple agents in the pipeline that are showing great efficacy and sort of hope and a very quick improvement in liver conditions. So that's encouraging, but we've got a long way to go.
Naim, thanks for an excellent opening statement and great question answers, and always a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. Donna, you're up next.
Thank you. So much of this evolving field of NASH is what we make of it. So my predictions are aspiration as signaling as to what I intend to do and where I'd like the field to go. When I think about the next few months, given what the last few have looked like, I really think about regrouping to be able to press forward. And what I mean by that is reassessing the progress that we've made and thinking about how we can sharpen our arguments, add more data to things that are working, and really get even smarter about where we are trying to take the field. And so an example of that would be working more closely with the type 2 diabetes community, both patient and clinician. And Naim, the paper that you worked on with Dr. Nuruddin and others is an excellent example of providing more evidence on the enhanced value of screening in a type 2 diabetes population because of the highest prevalence of NAFLD and NASH that we know, but we haven't done such a great job of proving to the point where every endocrinologist, every diabetologist is sitting up paying attention and wanting to move forward really aggressively with us. We've seen a great partnership from folks like Ken Kuzi and Rita Basu and the Endocrine Society and ACE. And so I really think that focusing on the type 2 diabetes population, who are not only more likely to have NAFLD or NASH, but to have an advanced form. And while from literally a global perspective, an larger advocacy perspective, it doesn't mean I'm taking a step away from the earlier stage NAFLD or NASH or prevention. But I think what I've been really listening to the field and so many different groups of advisor calls with folks from around the world is that we still have a job to do in terms of convincing the larger clinical populace that NAFLD and NASH is real and that there's an urgency around it. Getting that sharper focus on NASH and type 2 diabetes is really an important thing to increase traction on in this next few months. And I think that job of convincing translates into the work that we need to do in the regulatory space on the urgency around NASH drug development. I'm seeing a disturbing pattern across all forms of liver disease in, it seems to me, a misperception and a misunderstanding of the urgency of evaluating and approving surgeries, therapies, medications in the liver field. And so from a patient perspective, putting together patient-focused drug development, supporting those already in progress, and making sure that we have robust data on patient perspectives, patient risk and benefit, from the very large and yet diffuse and heterogeneous NASH patient population, and putting that in front of regulators in an undeniable way is certainly something that I'll be focused on over this lovely autumn.
I just wanted to thank you, Donna, for mentioning the cost-effectiveness paper that we published that shows that, screening for NAFLD in diabetic who's 55-year-old and then providing the intervention being intensive lifestyle modifications was actually cost-effective. I think, this is something we're pushing for now to screen all diabetics. The screening also can vary from liver function test to ultrasound to also considering a FibroScan test on every diabetic. And I know a few diabetes clinics that do this routinely now. So same way you do your foot exam, your eye exam, you also do your FibroScan. And this way you can screen for fatty liver with the CAP score, and then you can find advanced fibrosis with the liver stiffness as measured by the FibroScan machine. So, as the availability of these technologies increases, I think it's going to become standard of care that we screen all diabetics.
So, Naim, Louise is only 6,000 miles away from me right now, and I can still see her nodding her head up and down enthusiastically as you talk about the idea of screening all type 2 diabetics with FibroScan.
It was interesting because I was listening to him there and I was listening to Donna, and I did some screening a couple of weeks ago in 3 homeless locations, and there was only a few of them with any concerns from their liver stiffness. However, over 70% of them had high-fat steatosis grade 3. And we know FibroScan is not as accurate as dynamic fat fraction, but as Stephen says continuously, anything over 280 we would expect to see replicated on liver biopsies. So most of them had either, or several of them to be fair, had either been diagnosed as diabetic or in pre-diabetes conditions or had cardiac conditions. So maybe we shouldn't be so worried about our drinking and drug-using populations from a liver perspective, but maybe we should be from endocrine and cardiology perspective, because they were all really amazed that they had decent livers and were actually really excited that they could actually still save their livers. So the buy-in and the turnaround for the people that we scanned was absolutely amazing. It also challenged some stereotypes that some of the care workers had, that everybody who drinks eventually has damaged liver. So it was very good sessions. But yes, I was smiling when Naim was talking about just being able to assess, and I think it is personally quick because that's what we provide that access. But looking in the drinking communities, their liver was fine in the majority, but over 80% of those had high liver fat, which was more of a concern.
This is kind of a composite question. I'm going to see if I can hit at least 2, maybe all 3 of you with the same question. Right. One of the things we've talked about a couple of times in the last few weeks was the presentation from Zobair Younoussy's group at Digital ILC that looked at every death certificate issued in the U.S. in the year 2017 and came to the conclusion that the leading cause of death among NAFLD patients was, in fact, liver disease. We talked last week about how that might lead us to refocus how we think about the benefit of treating earlier stage. Louise, what you just said aligns really neatly with that kind of a perspective, right? Maybe the liver isn't indubitably damaged yet, but the high fat portends bad things for the future, not just maybe for the liver, but also cardiovascular. But to Donna, first of all, how does that kind of thinking influence what you're working on and what you would like to see happen going forward? Does that make it harder for a liver advocate, easier for a liver advocate, or it just changes the message a little bit? And then to the rest of you, what do you think ensues as the result of that over time, if anything?
A focus on liver disease and deaths from liver disease can only make our message more impactful. And so to have that evidence is so very valuable. The Global Liver Institute have always discussed a solution for every stage. And then the solution at earlier stages may be more intensive lifestyle interventions, perhaps supported, and making sure that there's coverage for dietitians or additional types of support so that people can be successful in that at that earlier stage. But what it means, and what my earlier message about sort of shifting strategy or shifting emphasis of our strategy remains the same. That I think that in our listening and in the totality of the evidence, that a particular focus on those with type 2 diabetes will give us greater traction to be able to treat everyone. We don't have that buy-in and traction yet to be so diffuse. And so I think by targeting in a population for which the ROI of the work is so clear and can satisfy all the audiences involved, whether that is a clinician, a patient, a payer, a health system, of making these initial investments, then allows us to make the case. And, and we can keep going up the stream. We can go up the stream to people who are not diabetic or not in an advanced stage. But if we can't even get, attention for those who are showing up with concomitant diagnosis of NASH and liver cancer, or NASH and needing a transplant for the first time, making the argument about, investments in care for folks who are early in the stage is harder. So I just think it's a reordering and a refocusing. But the intention is certainly not to leave no patient behind, because I have to use a military term if Stephen isn't here and represents. So we want to make sure that we leave no patient behind. But I think from a strategic point of view, focusing on these, at-risk, high-risk, advanced patients, particularly with diabetes, is where we're going to be heading.
Great answer and great presentation. Anybody with a final question?
I thought it was a great presentation, and I echo Donna's sentiments there, and I think eventually we have to come at it from both ends to get better outcomes. We have to treat the more severe disease first, but we also have to target to prevent people getting the disease or any of these diseases in the first place. So it has to be two-tailed. Push me, pull you. Is that not the thing in Dr. Dolittle?
Good. For the rest of the animal kingdom, we thank you. And Louise, why don't you go on to your topic?
My topic is one that I regularly bring up, I suppose. It's more about the wellness aspect and the sustained development goals. And I think recently the Lancet produced the Poverty Commission, which was bridging the gap in universal health coverage. I think it was last week, 14th of September. They did a summary of the SDGs in the poorest billion, and they expressed some concerns about the 5x5 model favoured by WHO, which focuses on cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, and mental ill health. We know that poor liver condition and NAFLD and NASH are involved in cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes, and also affect mental health. But the elephant in the room is it's not mentioned in those 5 diseases, but it's intrinsic to 4 of them. And the 5 risk factors: tobacco use, unhealthy diets, physical inactivity, harmful alcohol use, and air pollution. So again, the elephant in the room is all of that is about lifestyle acquired and affects the liver. That's 3 out of 5 of those. And I think, is it possible to target a sustained goal, which is, this is 3.4. I think the aim is to reduce mortality in NCDs by 2030 by about 30%. But can we solely rely on better health techniques in those 5 areas and not account and attribute for the growing population of those patients, and ignore one of the biggest causes or contributors? Obviously, we don't have the exact mechanism that NAFLD and NASH are involved in diabetes, and there are certainly studies whereby you can get people with NAFLD and NASH who do not have cardiometabolic syndromes. So I think it's schools out, but we know that there's a connection there somewhere. We just haven't got it. And I had a look at the Economic Forum report, because up until 2010, chronic diseases were considered in the top 3 of the biggest threats to the global economy, and within the top 4 of the impact. But they suddenly disappeared. Pandemics were included in that as well, but they suddenly disappeared in 2010. And I wasn't sure what happened, to why we suddenly lost track of healthcare being a significant contributor to the global risks. And yet this year we're obviously paying for that. So 2010 they disappear off the Economic Forum's reports. Life expectancies increased. So I wonder why they went on to do that. So it's very, very difficult when I look at where we're heading. And I appreciate what Donna said about the research. I also appreciate what all of the international liver areas do and consultant colleagues. And it is about the evidence, but it's very difficult to avoid the correlation with the rise of liver disease. Liver cancer is one of the biggest growing threats to prevent the NCD completing the task of improving health and reducing mortality. Australia leads the world in its rise in liver cancer. And I think we have a massive problem with liver cancer all around the world. And if the first time in healthcare we mention liver disease is when we've got to cancer, we have all missed catching the ball for a long time, given the length of time it does take, which is why when Donna talks about type 2 diabetes, it's intrinsic. They have a 4 times greater risk of developing liver cancer. So if I was type 2 diabetic, I'd be putting my hands up to my doctor and saying, please test my liver. And when I have that conversation with type 2 diabetics about the discussion about your liver fat, nobody's ever mentioned it. And I think it does continue. But I think coming to a close on that, there was a very interesting session that I attended at the Digital ILC, which is EASL are now combining the International Liver Foundation with a group to bring this now towards the SDGs. And it was a UK think tank, Wilton Park and EASL. I think there's a number of stakeholders involved. I'm not too sure whether Donna and the GLI are involved, but they do say global patient advocates. So that's really encouraging that we are now starting as a liver community to start that dialogue at the sort of global level. And I think it has to happen. We have to get liver disease and screening at the table. There was also an EASL or a European-funded project called Liver Screen, which is looking at exactly what Naim was talking about earlier, and that I advocate is that placing FibroScan earlier in the timeline helps. But that's a 5-year study, and it's looking at who we should be screening. So there's lots of good things coming out. I hope that they will look at the evidence and provide a lot of the evidence that we're all discussing now. But I just also had a thought that maybe we need to take it out the silo, and I looked at the people who were around the table, hepatologists, NCD specialists, public health advocates, they all come from an area of illness, so they're all been affected or look after people who are affected. I would have liked to have seen wellness or lifestyle medicine there, because a lot of it has to go about prevention, as we discussed earlier in this episode, and I think we do have to look beyond the past and the current medical straitjackets that were held within our thinking. But what if chronic diseases just comes down to a lack of education? How you actually look after yourself physically, socially, mentally. It's not a topic I ever covered or was taught in school. You can come out knowing the mechanics of a car better than you can come out knowing the mechanics of your body and how to look after it. So if we took it back in every school, maybe we should get educators around these health teams, because bringing back education into schools about how you look after your body from when you first attend school to at the end of it, you may always grow up knowing how to look after yourself, which comes to the prevention of NCDs in the majority of people if we know how to look after our health and our liver health. And I think it is encouraging now to see liver starting to be at the table to discuss the sustainable goals, because that's actually quite exciting. Hopefully we'll get a Arsel and everybody else around the table for that, because we have to be there. So that was what I was bringing, and over the next 3 months, whether or not we'll see much of that happen because of the pandemic rising throughout Europe again, I'm not too sure, but it would be great to see some movement around that table.
That's great, Louise.
I just want to underscore that and clarify that, yes, the Global Liver Institute is the aforementioned patient voice that is at that table for NASH and for other things in the Wilton Park effort. You know, we were founded really for that purpose, to place liver health, not just liver disease, but liver health as part of the global public health agenda commensurate with its prevalence and impact. So that has been our vision since our founding. We are a member of the NCD Alliance. And so part of that global alliance to focus on non-communicable disease and those sustainable goals. And it's been fantastic to see just in the past few months a momentum towards doing that. Certainly when we were able to add an office in Europe, that helped our ability to make those partnerships with the UN and the WHO and with EASL and others to sort of light a fire under all of that. And it's been really exciting, the traction. I think that NASH provides a particular opportunity that we hadn't really seized on in other liver diseases. Even when we had the excitement around a hepatitis C cure, the focus wasn't really on the cure. Perhaps it got, weighed down in a lot of other controversy. And we didn't really talk about liver health because of the interconnectedness of NASH to other conditions, which you so well articulate. I think this is our time, that this is our opportunity to really position liver health alongside cardiovascular health and other things that have that type of recognition and have that type of, investment addressing it to bring that to liver health. So I'm really excited about that and could not underscore your point more fully. I'd end just on the question of education. Is it so much that people don't know what to do or they have a hard time doing it? Is it the knowledge per se, or is it the coaching or the peer group, helping reinforce what we know we need to do every day? Which one, should we be weighting more heavily on, the education or the support function?
Well, I'd have thought, when I thought about it, I thought about the education. If you go into school, it doesn't matter which school, and we know that education throughout the world is different. And I think if it's in your own region, at the age of 4 or 3 or 5 or 6, when you go into school, you have a session a week on actually what's happening with your body. Where are the bits and pieces? How is one organ connected to the other one? I used to learn the ankle bone was connected to the shin bone was connected to the knee bone. But actually, we forget that throughout healthcare. Our body isn't siloed. Your liver does more in 1 second than we'll ever know in its lifetime, in our lifetimes. And I think if we actually know why we're walking to keep fit, why a healthy diet keeps us fit, and our sleep helps our mental health, and if our liver's overweight, it can affect our skin, our tiredness, our levels. And if we actually understand that, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, if you actually understand and have that education, you know why you might be taking less care or not as good care. We wouldn't think twice about spending 4 years in braces to correct our teeth, but we don't think that spending 4 years looking after our weight to reduce it, we want an immediate fix. Whereas if we're educated that that's not actually how our body works, you can take that pressure off yourself. But you might actually prevent people getting it in the first place because people are more savvy. If your liver never gets overweight, you may never develop high blood pressure, high cholesterol, arteriosclerosis. We've got to prove those yet, but the theory is there. So if you educate a child to keep fit and healthy throughout their adulthood, then hopefully we would reduce, the theory being that we would reduce the amount of people that develop those other NCDs. Because that's what we're seeing around the world.
Louise, I agree with you, but the forecaster in me thinks about it this way, right? If we start treating kids in school, picture this as if this is a hose, water hose of patients. And we have patients of all ages, but we have patients in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s, getting into places from which their health will be vitally damaged for the rest of their lives. If you put your foot on the water hose when someone is 5, you can stop what goes into the hose, but the literally billions of people that are going to tumble out that hose before it's done suggest that that's part of the solution. But at the same time, I think we also need to have a solution for how do we educate adults, which is tougher because generally. Now we're educating people who are sick, right? You made the comment before, which I thought really was exciting, about being able to go to people who are drug and alcohol affected, show them that they hadn't destroyed their livers for good yet, and get them to be enthusiastic about how to practice better behaviors. Now, Stephen's comment about a lot of that stuff has been, there's a reason there's no sequel to the show World's Biggest Loser. You go back a year later, it's not clear what you'll find. But if you could get those people excited and people with less severe problems excited, and then we had a way to help them educate and change behavior in real time, while at the same time dealing with the children, then I think you've got a two-pronged approach. And I think if I had to give up one or the other, I'd give up educating the 5-year-olds, but I'd like not to have to give up either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it does make sense. And I think I see so many people, and I'm sure every physician and Naim and everybody will say, oh, is that where my liver is? I thought I had two. And it is, we come out of education systems, we might know the chemistry, but we just don't know about ourselves. And yet ourselves are the biggest investment anybody can financially make, because if we're fit and healthy, we're a competent workforce. And I think people will still eat the wrong things. People will still not exercise, but actually you make a conscious choice because you know a little bit more. And I think Maya Angelou once said, and it's a favourite quote of mine, if I'd have known better, I'd have done better. Actually, our children don't know better. And a lot of those adults don't know better. And I'm forever being educated by my stepchildren. They love to come home and go, guess what I learned today? So I would hope, yes, it will be a two-pronged approach, but it's a cheaper approach to spend an hour of education a week for the 10, 12, 15 years they're there than actually to spend millions and billions on medication. So it's a long-term approach, but it needs to be round the table.
I think there's investment and there's expense, right? What you're talking about is investment, and it will be amazingly efficient. And then in the meantime, we also have to manage what's more directly in front of us. I completely agree with you on that.
I want to mention here our friends at NASH Knowledge who have started a pediatric NASH education program using the Oliver and Olivia coloring books that Thelma Thiel, long-term liver health advocate who was on the GLI founding board and who unfortunately lost her child to a pediatric liver disease, the work that they're doing in this area to bring liver health education into schools. So people should support that.
Yeah, excellent initiative.
Agreed.
Yeah, just want to mention something briefly. We have an epidemic of NAFLD, alcoholic liver disease, but we are learning more about something now we call both alcoholic and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We recently published a paper, and now we call it BAFLD, B-A-F. And, this is a true problem. And, when you have people that drink, 4 or 5 drinks a day, but they also have type 2 diabetes and obesity, metabolic syndrome, I truly believe it's not just the alcohol. I think it's both NAFLD and alcoholic liver disease combined. And the other point is that recently the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommended that men should decrease the daily alcohol intake to the same level as women. So we used to say it's okay for a man to have 2 drinks a day, and now it's just 1 drink a day. And we need to really just admit to ourselves that, drinking alcohol, probably the benefit is exaggerated and the risk is real. So the way I think about drinking alcohol now is like smoking cigarettes. Nothing good is going to come out of it. I think the cardiovascular benefit has been, hard-toned, but I'm not a believer, and I see all the bad things that happen with alcohol. So, education is important, but, I would like to get that message out that, the less alcohol you drink, the better it is for your health, and especially if you have advanced liver disease.
Thank you, Louise, for a really instructive and important set of issues about thinking about liver disease in a way that people who aren't in this community don't think about it. And maybe people who are in this community don't think about how people who aren't in this community don't think about it. I know that's a really complex set, but I think it is the point. So I want to spend the last 10 or 12 minutes. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about COVID, because COVID overhangs everything. And we don't have a ton of time on this podcast. We will come back in 2 or 3 weeks and do an episode on COVID, I promise. But for today, I want to touch on some things that I think are related to what we've been talking about. Number one, the hyper-attention on COVID, the fact that so much attention is placed on it. And it's part of everybody's lead news stories every day, and case counts and death rates and all that stuff, and the politicization around that. It drowns out a lot of the space that people would use to talk about, learn about, or think about other more subtle health issues, like, for example, liver and the way that that Louise was just describing. I think that's number one. Number two, apologies to the audience. We try very hard never to talk about politics in any shape or form on this program. We certainly don't endorse anybody, but there are things that just have to be mentioned in this conversation. So, for example, in the U.S., in the last 24 hours, Secretary of Health and Human Services announced that he, not FDA, would have final decisions on drugs and vaccines going forward. And the CDC website, which had posted that we now understand coronavirus to be airborne, took that down and went back to the position that goes, it's mostly by human contact and touch, when in fact, the overwhelming consensus is that this is an airborne disease, and airborne management is going to be pivotal to its long-term social effect. Unfortunately, we are in the middle of a political environment, and we have a president who said one thing on tape to Bob Woodward and another thing to the country. So CDC has now reverted to what he said to the country. Science makes mistakes because science is an open-ended inquiry. We go with the best information we've got. It's not always very good, but it's an honest inquiry. And if we get to the point where we start managing scientific information to meet anybody's political ends, and by this I mean not just say what I just described, but also people with other political persuasions who are managing evidence in very different ways to their own ends. We damage the ability to put COVID in a realistic context and therefore to really trust anything in science. We're already seeing a decrease in belief in vaccine among people who historically thought vaccine are great because of the politicization they perceive around the COVID vaccine. In the middle of all that, even in the middle of a COVID discussion, we've seen some papers earlier in the year about the idea that prior NAFLD might be a predictor of severity of COVID infection, but we're not seeing that getting a lot of traction. I'm not sure that there's enough oxygen for it to breathe right now. So those three collective issues, the overfocus on COVID and the politicization of COVID data, and the idea that folks are using it for politically driven agendas, I think makes it tough for the liver community to do the things that we need to do to educate and get attention right now. I don't know how that plays out, but I think it's something we watch carefully over the next 3 months.
These are excellent points, Roger, and I just wanted to comment on COVID and NAFLD. Number one is our patients with NAFLD have a lot of comorbidities that definitely increase your risk for severe COVID. So on average, patients with NAFLD, 80% have overweight, obesity, about 45% have type 2 diabetes, and then about 2/3 have hypertension. Data from the Chinese CDC showed clearly that patients with obesity and type 2 diabetes have higher mortality rates related to COVID, and these are very common in our patients with NAFLD. More recently, a study also from China looked at 200 patients that were admitted to the hospital with COVID, and they looked at NAFLD based on liver ultrasound that showed fatty infiltration, or something we call the hepatic steatosis index, which is an easy way to determine the presence of fatty liver. And they showed patients with fatty liver were more likely to develop severe COVID and to also have a longer virus shedding. So I do believe that NAFLD patients are considered high risk for severe COVID.
Thanks, Naim. For that same reason, I'll be very intrigued to see what happens when Perspectum starts talking about the cover stand work tomorrow. The earlier, Perspectum UK Biobank paper suggested that NAFLD was a stronger independent predictor of COVID severity than the comorbidities with which it's associated. As they start to roll out a multi-organ look, it'll be intriguing to find out if that's confirmed, reversed, minimized, maximized, whatever, and then whether it gets any oxygen or airplay. I think your points, though, about, and your summary of the work that's been done is really excellent and very valuable. Thank you for it.
So as we at the Global Liver Institute have been trying to guide patients from early March through this pandemic, I so appreciate the rigorous scientific work that has been done to give us more information on how COVID is impacting liver patients, those with NASH, patients with liver transplant recipients that are otherwise immunocompromised, the different registries like SECURE and the pediatric liver transplant registry that have been set up to get us the actual factual information that's necessary to make decisions. I think to your overall statements, Roger, we have to do everything possible to reinforce reliance on and support for the production, collection, and dissemination of actual, credibly produced science. Our lives depend on it. My heart and every type of support goes out to those scientists, career scientists and researchers and public health officials throughout the United States governments and in governments throughout the world who are valiantly trying to get out accurate information to the public and others so that we can make decisions. As a liver patient right now, I think it's very important for patients to understand what a safe healthcare environment looks like and to either ask, their clinic, what steps are in place, but to go and to get their blood work, their screening, their follow-up tests. Liver cancer is not stopping progression. If we're placed on the liver transplant list, you're not getting better during this time. So there is an urgency about having patients continue to seek non-COVID related care. And as health systems are increasingly sophisticated in providing both COVID and non-COVID care, as we know, we're about to go into both COVID and flu season very soon. Patients should be getting their needed care, not delaying it. They should get their flu shots. I just got mine. They should be, if they can, sign up for COVID-19 vaccine and therapy research so that we will know that it works on liver patients. All of that said, there is not a COVID-19 vaccine that you could pay me to take before November. And there is nothing you could tell me or show me at this point because the political damage is so done that I, as somebody who has, been in healthcare now for more than a quarter century and has been in Washington, D.C. for all of that time, there is no vaccine, no COVID-19 vaccine that you could get me to take before November 3rd. So I'll simply say that as I continue to wear my increasingly diverse set of masks, wash my hands, and social distance, even though as I go out and about as necessary.
I just think we've obviously plastered all over our society about losing weight, about going on soups and shakes to help people lose weight. The NHS have reduced an app. I actually did write to Boris Johnson in May saying that in lieu of no vaccine, possibly our biggest ability to help our populations, like the type 2 diabetes or the 14.3 million who are expected to have MAFLD, was actually that weight loss may well be our biggest ability that people can do now to help their own health. And I think going back to Donna's comments at the very beginning, the purchase to be able to now work with that she's getting with diabetes, they are some of the biggest populations at risk. And I think it is a shame that any political agenda can detract from patients or people learning facts that could help them get a better outcome from COVID. Going back to the biobank, that was 10% body fat and more in obese patients doubled your risk of severe COVID and outcome, whereas normal liver fat in people who were obese did not increase their risks at all. So that was what you were on about, Roger. And I think it will be very interesting. We can't necessarily dynamic fat fraction everybody, but I think the strength of the evidence that can produce is colossal and it carries a lot of weight. So it'll be interesting to hear what they say, but it's a shame that any political agenda gets in the way.
Thanks, all of you. In wrapping up, I want to make one thing clear. Okay. It is not my intention to endorse a political candidate or party. There are many reasons to vote for any candidate for office without dealing with this particular set of issues. But facts are stubborn things. There are facts around these set of issues, and in the context of what we're talking about today, not who you vote for, but how you deal with issues around liver disease, those are facts we need to deal with. So I hope everybody gets the context right and understands what we are and aren't saying here. And with that, I'd like to wrap up today's episode. Closing question, same question we usually ask. What's the biggest surprise you got today, or the one thing that you learned or thought about while we were on podcast?
Louise made me believe in education again. And if everybody educated or taught, health at school and made it as relatable and relevant as Louise did, we would have healthier people.
Mm-hmm. I learned a lot about all these initiatives to, increase screening, especially in underserved communities, and this is great. And also to engage the endocrine society and diabetes specialists in our efforts to increase awareness of NAFLD and the burden of liver disease in this population. So it's refreshing to see everything you guys are doing. Thank you.
I've got two things. I've got the work that Naim was talking about, doing scanning and keeping patients into clinical trials. starts, which I need to look up and read that because that sounds exciting. And also absolutely reassured that Donna and GLI are around the table with EASL, the International Liver Foundation, and at Wilton Parks with the Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives work. So both of those, so congratulations.
I'm with Donna. I think I'm appreciating the importance of education. But one of the things I was realizing almost as I was speaking is that it may be that one of the best ways to educate people in their 30s and 40s is to do what Louise described and have their kids come home from school and tell them what they learned. They may be much more able to absorb that way. And I know a bunch of people who over the years quit smoking mostly because the kids got on them to quit smoking. So ideally, education can not only be directly efficient with the kids, but drive that kind of support as well. And that would really be a fantastic double. With that, time to wrap up. Please come on the discussion groups. Tell us what you want our AASLD coverage while we're still planning it so that you don't get to the event and go, gee, I wish they had done that. This is your opportunity to tell us about it. Special thanks to everyone who makes this podcast happen. Obviously, Louise, Donna, Naim for being able to come on today. Mike Wilson, our engineer, Buzzsprout, who publishes our podcast, Eric Rounds, who runs our social media, Polite LA, who runs the media, and Ryan Segura, who edits all this. Thanks to you folks who help and as we continue to grow this and make it the entity that it's becoming. We will be back next week. I don't know what we'll be talking about exactly yet. I think there's a chance it might be COVID. There's a chance it might be diagnostics. There's a chance it might be something that hasn't come up yet. But Stephen will be with us, as will Louise, as Louise and Donna, and we'll see who else. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Hope you join us again next week and stay safe. Surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.